Thank you for checking out the Long Run Podcast. As you probably know, being a young adult is sometimes just as confusing as it can be exciting. Our 20s and 30s bring about many life-altering decisions and seasons of change. How we decide to live through those seasons will directly impact us in the long run. Our vision for this podcast is to help you make your life count by knowing Jesus, loving Him, and becoming like Him daily. Having said that, here's the next episode of the Long Run Podcast. Oh gosh. Well, Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Long Run Podcast. We have Coach Mike MacIntyre with us today, and I'm your host, Weston Downing.
I'm Jeff Jones. I'm helping out.
Coach Mike MacIntyre joining us today is the defensive coordinator for the University of Memphis Tigers football team. Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.
Coach, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much.
I'm glad you escaped a little bit of quarantine to come out and be with us.
Exactly.
I think this is 6 or 7 feet, so we're okay here.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, Coach, just to get our audience familiar with yourself, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, where you're from? Tell us about your family.
Well, I'm from a little bit all over, but I was born in Miami, Florida. My dad played college football at Miami, started coaching at Miami. I'm a coach's son, so we moved around a lot, kind of like an Army brat. But I would call Nashville, Tennessee home. That's where I went to junior high and high school. I'm married for 30 years to Trisha. She was Trisha Rowan McIntyre, and been wonderful. We have 3 awesome kids, a daughter, Jennifer, who's a speech pathologist in Denver, Colorado at Chaparral High School. She's married to Blake Froistad, got married last summer. So we have a son-in-law, which we love and is exciting. Then have a son, Jay McIntyre, who's a wide receivers coach at University of Tennessee Martin, who played wide receiver for us at Colorado, was an excellent player. And then I have a young son, Johnson McIntyre, who's going to college at Chapman University. He's the starting quarterback for Chapman University in Orange, California. They're on quarantine, so he's back home, but it's a tough life having to go to school and right beside Disneyland and right there by Newport Beach. So he loves it out there, and he's got one more year.
That sounds like a tough life.
Yeah. Now, Jay, is he married?
Jay's not married, no.
Dating?
No, not that I know of.
So
he's married to football right now.
Yeah, we can make that a promo for,
Exactly. There in Martin, that'd be good.
Martin, Martin's a small town.
Exactly right.
So you've been in Memphis. How long have you been in Memphis so far?
January 10th, I believe, is my start date.
Okay.
We're very familiar with Memphis, and recruited this area a lot in the past, and played against the Memphis Tigers, coached against them, a few times, and excited to be here with a great football program with Coach Silverfield, and what the success they've had over the last 5 or 6 years has been amazing, and all the new facilities and the support. I'm excited about this 2020 season coming up.
For sure. Well, we're excited to have you here. I hope the community has welcomed you well, especially I bet they've put you down for a lot of barbecue around here.
Yeah, it is. Everybody's been very welcoming. And, of course, this time it's a little bit not as welcoming because you have to do all the social distancing. But everybody's been really, really nice to us and everywhere we've been.
That's good to hear. Well, if you don't mind, just share with us, too, a little bit of background about where you've coached and what capacity, where all have you been. You shared a little bit about where you've moved around to.
Right. If I did everywhere I moved, it would take up the whole show. I guess a few highlights is I graduated from Georgia Tech, played football there, played at Vanderbilt for 2 years before that, got my master's at the University of Georgia where I started coaching, and then I kind of traveled through the years and coached at Ole Miss for a while under David Cutcliffe, and then got an opportunity to go to the Dallas Cowboys, coach under Bill Parcells at the Dallas Cowboys for 4 years, and then New York Jets. Then I went back with Coach Cutcliffe to Duke for a couple years, and then I was able to be the head coach at San Jose State University for 3, and University of Colorado for 6, and then last year I was at Ole Miss, and now I'm at Memphis. So that's kind of a quick nutshell of everything there, and we've had a lot of great opportunities, a lot of great places.
Yeah. What were some of the, as you look over your coaching career, what are the highlights what are the
Right.
lowlights? What are some things you liked?
Well, I think when you, the fans and the people in the media, they look at all the wins and losses and the championships and the hirings and the firings and all of that. So my greatest moments are with those young men and the guys on the staff, and really seeing lives changed, and then getting a phone call or a text. And probably like y'all, this is a time of year all of a sudden you get a phone call out of the blue, or you get a text out of the blue, or you get an email out of the blue for somebody thanking you for something. Hey, I was thinking about you. Because everybody's I think that's what's really good about this time right now. You kind of sit and reflect and look at life is not, it could be gone in a minute with all the things that we see going on. I think it's making us really reflect. And so that's been really unique. I think those are truly the high points.
Sure.
Low points are when you're trying to help guys and they don't see it, and things don't work out for them in life, and you kind of see them are going to fall apart at the seams. Those are the highest and lows. As far as the football goes, we've had lows of losing games and getting fired, and we've had highs of being in the Pac-12 on the entire history of football. We had the biggest turnaround in the history of the Pac-12 in 102 years now. I think they've had the Pac-12, and named National Coach of the Year, and did things they've never done there before. When we were at San Jose State University, we've won the most games in the history of their school. Did a lot of things that haven't been done before at those places. And I kind of like to, what I feel like the Lord blessed me with is I've been able to kind of be a rebuilder. And I think that's the way he does us. He rebuilds us. And so I've been able to do that at a lot of different spots along the way as a head coach, as an assistant coach. And that's really a gift from God.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear.
Well, I like that too, because a lot of times the first thing that comes to mind is, well, this year we won. You said that. It's not about necessarily the games that you win or lose. It's more about, as you look back, it's whose lives you've invested in,
right? Exactly.
And what fruit comes from that. It's fun to watch and see and hear that. I think I've mentioned before that we were down in Panama City for a mission trip to share the gospel down there with Beach Reach, and we ran into some Ole Miss players, and they were really excited when I mentioned your name. They were like, "Oh, that's my man," So I said, "Yeah, he's now with Memphis." And I mentioned something about the Memphis Ole Miss game last year, and they didn't want to talk much after that. But
yeah, that was a defensive football game on both sides.
It was
completely defensive game.
It was. I was there. It was fun. So. Well, we want to ask you a couple of things. You were mentioning just some things about faith and how the Lord has led you in different ways. Tell us a little bit about your faith journey and your story about how you came to know Christ and who was involved in that.
Right. My story is kind of like you would like most people's to be. I don't have one of those crazy stories where I was way off the reservation. Now I have sinned, I have made mistakes. Don't be that. But I came to know the Lord when I was 10 years old, and I remember it was when my dad was coaching at UT Martin in Martin, Tennessee. I remember being saved there, accepting Christ as my Lord and Savior. Completely remember it like yesterday. Know that I've made that decision, and then through that I've grown in my faith. I've stumbled, I've fallen, I've relied on Him, and grown to have a love and understanding that it's truly grace and His mercy, and it's been a growing experience. And I think in all our Christian walks and different things in life that you are growing continuously. And I think the more I get closer to Christ and the more I get to know Him, the more I realize how much I don't know, and how much I am thankful for His grace and mercy for loving me. And as we just got illustrated on Easter just the other day, how real that really is, and how thankful we should be.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good. Yeah. So when you gave your life to Christ, you're 10 years old, and obviously you've grown from that point. Right. I was a similar age, I think, and then went through high school, and I was like, what am I doing with my life? What did you realize about yourself, or what made you want to do that? Because we hear that all the time.
Right. I think that, at that time, I realized that Jesus Christ died on the cross for my sins, that I needed, that I realized there was a heaven and a hell, and I realized there was eternity. Right. Flat out knew that, and I wanted to be in eternity with Christ. Now, that's the first step of it, and then growing to giving him every part of my life. And that's a daily basis.
Sure.
I'll go, no, I don't want to give that up, and I give that up, and then it works to the next step. And I think that goes on daily with me. And very thankful for the people that God has brought into my life to encourage me, to grow me, to challenge me. And I think that it's a growing process every day.
Right.
And hopefully, and then as I'm growing, I realize that people are watching me, or the people that I need to talk to or witness to. And a lot of times, it's not that you sit down and share the gospel with them. There's a lot of times you need to do that. Okay, there's no doubt. But a lot of times they're watching you if you live the gospel.
Sure.
And then when you make mistakes, if you come back and say, hey, I screwed that up, I apologize, I'm sorry. Right. They go, wait, something's different. And I think that every day you're kind of, they always tell you you're on a job interview, you're always making your resume. I think you're always making your Christian resume too.
Wow, that's true. That's
and
good.
So I think that's important to realize, even though there's a lot of times I don't think that.
Right.
But I believe if I put that in my forefront of my daily days, that it'd be a different how I attack the day.
Yeah, that's a great point. Bible states it that we're ambassadors of Christ, and how we live will reflect him, and we should live in a way that make people think, well, why is he so loving? Why is he so generous? Why is he so forgiving? It's like, well, because we've been forgiven, and we've been given the ultimate gift. So when we think about you and your role as a collegiate college football coach, I think I played football in high school. I wasn't that good, so that's okay. But I think about coaches in the high school level, or potential people that want to be coaches. They want to get to that next level and get up in the collegiate realm, and you're there. You would be at the top for them. Maybe you don't think that, but from their perspective, yes. But since you're a Christian and you've been saved by faith and grace through God, how does that affect how you live your life and your job that might be the world to somebody else?
Well, it should affect everything. And I would like to say that I let it affect everything, and sometimes I don't. I want to take things into my own control. But it should affect everything. And the decisions I make on taking jobs, my decisions I make on how I coach, how I act, should all come through my heart. Sometimes I'll go, why did I react like that? And I realize my heart's not in the right place. And a lot of times I'm selfish, or I'm self-centered, or I'm egotistical. And all of that is changed through within. It's something I can't make happen, and that's through Christ. But it reflects every decision I make, everything I make, every action I do should be affected that way. I would like to say it happens all the time. I think it happens more than it doesn't, but it doesn't happen as often. The negative parts come up quite often. And thank goodness again for grace, and he reveals that to me and challenges me in my mind, challenges me in my heart to make some decisions and some changes.
That's good.
Was there a time maybe in your growing up years that you would say, man, this is a time where I really grew in my faith the most? I mean, it may be hard to identify, and I'm just
I think there are kind of markers that sometimes God has you to be able to look back at. I think one of the big markers was when I was playing at Vanderbilt University for my father, and they fired him after my sophomore year. And that was a marker of kind of figuring out, whoa, wait a minute. He did the things right. He turned a terrible program into an excellent program. The same people that loved him now 2 years later dislike him.
Wow.
And he was, I always like to say with my dad, he's gone in heaven now. And people ask me, what do you think is your dad? What do you think about your dad? And so many people don't have good dads. I had the most phenomenal dad ever. And I would say, well, I do believe this. I believe besides Jesus, he might be the best person to ever walk on the face of the earth because he lived it every day. And so when negative things happen, I go, why would negative things happen to a person that's living it right? And I realized, well, they nailed Christ on the cross, and he did everything right. And he died for them that were nailing him on the cross. So I think that I learned in that situation that was a hard time. And then I kind of went away from home for the first time and moved to Atlanta and went to Georgia Tech and played there and had some great coaches there and made some great friends. But that was kind of truly a growing up time. When I transferred, I had to sit out a year, so it was my first time not playing in games, and since I was 5 years old or whatever. Wow. So that was a growing time. I believe that when first got married was a growing time. You can't be selfish all the time. You think you're not, but you really realize how selfish you are when you get married.
Can't wait.
So that growing process, and then when you have kids,
sure,
it's another step of realizing, whoa, wait a minute. There's a lot of thoughts there, and then I think that I think that when we went to San Jose State, being a head coach for the first time, you learn when you become the leader, the main figurehead, that everybody wants something, and you're always pulled for your time. So how do you handle all those decisions?
Wow.
And I think that that's when you realize. I think sometimes, well, I know that, at least in my life, that the busier I get, the farther I pull away from God. That I have to take time on my own, by myself, with Christ, with the Bible, with time, with prayer time, or even sometimes not with just being still.
Yeah.
And then you're able to make it makes the rest of the day go better. It makes you make decisions better. I think busyness, sometimes people, they're so busy, I got so much to do, and they feel like they're doing, but all they are to me in my life, all it is kind of like that. You see that a squirrel on the steer wheel, you're just kind of turning the wheel. You're not making anything happen because you're so busy doing different things that you lose focus of what's really real.
That's good.
So I've learned that at different times. And then when we got fired at Colorado was a situation where to reflect and say, whoa, wait a minute, why me? Which is a stupid question to ask, but you go through that. And I think that was an excellent growing time for my heart and my spirit. And then, so we just move on. The Lord, what I've learned is the Lord puts us in different places, kind of like a missionary. And then when it's time to go, either our choice that he's telling us to go or somebody else's choice, that you still dust off your sandals. You're thankful for what happened, and now you go work where he put you and live for him there, because that's what it's really all about. It's not about what we're doing. It's about what he's doing. And,
I love
it's hard to do that in this world sometimes because of all the media stuff.
I love the fact that one of the growing times for you was your dad getting fired at Vanderbilt, and then one of the growing times was you getting fired at Colorado.
Exactly.
And both programs were doing well underneath both your leadership. I just like that heritage of discipleship in those situations. And you shared with us before the podcast started that your son's home and he's coaching football right now at UT Martin.
Right.
And you guys are in the same room looking at film and talking to your players and stuff. And so it's still going on. It's another generation. And I think one of the neat things is that your dad was at UT Martin. Right. You were at UT Martin, and now your son is at UT Martin.
Yeah, Martin's been a special place to our family in a lot of ways. And we excited to see Jay back there at UT Martin coaching there.
That's fun.
And loving it. And, it's been unique with him being quarantined, and we're in there and we're watching film, and then he's doing a Zoom deal with his receivers, and I'm doing a Zoom deal with the DBs and the defensive coaches, and it's exciting times.
That's fun. That is fun.
That's awesome to hear.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, or just identify that you mentioned being still and not being busy, and I think this morning as I was spending some time alone, I was thinking about this whole concept of the frustration of the quarantine, but then we're eating together as a family more than we ever have.
Right.
Dishes are constantly dirty in our house.
Good sign.
And we've stopped eating out as much just because of the very nature of the situation and all these things. And it's almost like we're being forced into the stillness. Yeah. God's put us to recalibrate our lives toward Him and toward each other, and find out what's important in the setting of where we've gotten so busy that we've lost track and lost sight. So I just thought that was really neat.
I agree. I think that boredom is a good thing at times, because we're so busy with our phones and televisions. People are going to think I'm crazy. I wish all the electricity would go out for a few days.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I wish all the phone lines on the cell phone
Yes.
towers would go down.
I agree.
And then we'd even get closer.
That's
and we
right.
would talk, and so it's been good, because I think maybe it will eventually, because we'll have watched everything we can on Netflix or Hulu,
Right.
And then you'll have to
Actually
read
talk and
talk
read,
and
yeah. Right.
and but it really that has been good.
Yeah.
The dinners with everybody together. I actually have time to help my wife do the dishes. I can't say I've got to go do this, make this phone call, whatever. So I'm actually having to do that. I actually know where the dishwasher is and
That's
how to work
right.
it now. So it's pretty amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, boredom is a scary thing for people my age, or being still, as you call it. And I hate to put that
true.
that label on young adults right now, and especially people that are in high school and these kids that are growing up, and their cell phone is now an extra limb of their body.
Exactly.
And it's like, I thought you were an 8-year-old. Why do you have why do you have an email account? It's weird.
Yeah.
And it scares me, especially if I have kids hopefully one day, and I'm like, what do I want them to grow up in? But I think about myself now, and everybody tries to do self-help stuff,
right,
or be more productive. But even especially, like Jeff asked me before, I was sitting here a minute ago and I was pretty quiet. I wasn't talking to him. He thought I was mad at him a minute ago. And I was like, no, that was yesterday, Jeff. But he was like, he was, I guess, asking if I was tired or something. I said, man, I slept a lot last night. And then he asked me, well, do you sleep with your phone beside your bed, or do you leave it out of the room? I was like, well, I put it across the room, but
Right, yeah.
I didn't last night.
Right.
And it's funny how much, when you wake up and that's the first thing you look at, it just
Right.
immediately drains you. But that's just adding to the extra distractions and things
Yeah,
that
exactly right.
you were talking about. But I like also to diverge from that topic of talking about all that stuff. You mentioned your dad was a big influence in your
Right.
life, and I think you mentioned that your wife was too.
Yes.
And just who God has made you, and you've kind of identified that He's making you a rebuilder, or a builder of these programs,
Right.
and stuff like that, and putting you in those situations. Who would you say are some people that have influenced your life? I mentioned a few, but
Well, and of course, my wife has been a huge influence in my life. Definitely in my Christian walk, and us being able to talk and grow. She's my best friend. That's been big in life, in the football side of it, or business side of it. I would say that David Cutcliffe, who's the head coach at Duke, has been a great influence on me. How he runs programs, how he raised his family, his relationship with his wife. He's been a great example. That's been an excellent mentor for me. I think that. When I went to the Dallas Cowboys, I learned a lot of football from Bill Parcells, Mike Zimmer, Sean Payton, all those guys. We were all on the staff together. So I wouldn't say they're mentors. Bill would be. But the other guys I learned so much from on the football side of it. That's been a big deal. And then I have some really, really close friends that have been really big influencers in my life too.
So with that being said, you've mentioned that in the beginning when we started this whole conversation, that the highs of your career were other students and athletes reaching out to you saying, thank you, coach, for just investing in me or helping me do this. Why do you think, or how do you try to put yourself in a position to influence people? Obviously you're a coach, but
Right.
that doesn't really mean that you can speak into somebody's life, I guess.
Right.
I don't know, but
Well, what I do as a Christian coach is, there's all these different things within universities that you're not allowed to do. But when they come ask you a direct question, you can answer the direct question. Yeah. And it's amazing how many times those young men walk in my office, or after a practice or whatever, and they're going through something and they ask me a direct question. Well, I can share now how I handle those situations through my faith, through different ways of changing things that I do on a daily basis. I keep Bibles in my office because that's the answer. So when they ask me a question, because other people give them other books, why can't I give them a Bible?
Yeah.
Which I definitely can when they ask a direct question. So I give them Bibles, and therefore I kind of lead them in those ways, and then I pray for them on a consistent basis. When they have different situations going on. And I think that's the biggest thing I can do.
Yeah.
And you have to take time to do that. And there's times that I don't take as much time as I would like, but that's how things are answered. I've been able to just growing and understanding how real that really is over time has taught me how much a difference that makes.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And I think that's encouraging too for like somebody like me in my life, or somebody that really loves the Lord and they think, well, to really serve God, I've got to go be a missionary and move somewhere where they haven't heard the gospel, or just go and be a pastor over a church. But like what you said and how God has moved you and your family around, how it's very similar. And we're beginning to see where those front lines are of your influence and where you're getting to do this ministry. And just, we label it ministry, but it's really just loving people. And as you really love them, you'll share for the hope that you have in you. I think that's 1 Peter 3:15. But that's awesome to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the fact that too, excuse me, that these guys are, I've seen video of you after a football game in Colorado in the locker room, praying with the guys.
Yep.
And you point them to your hope without pushing it specifically, but yet at the same time that example, that influence is there. And I think about even your kids, they're adults, but your children, you mentioned earlier about that. When your kids came along, that's when you start to grow, because you all of a sudden feel responsible for somebody else's direction in life. And I think a lot of times what happens for young adults, at least, is that they are not necessarily viewing themselves as responsible for anybody else except themselves.
Right.
But if we're going to do the Great Commission, which is to make disciples, it means we're going to invest in other people intentionally.
Right.
Because, if I didn't invest in my kids and you didn't invest in your kids, we've seen what happens with some people in culture where they just had kids and said, all right, do your best out there and we'll see what happens. But there are times where you discipline. There's times where you coach and cheer and so on. And I think that's what influence is taking responsibility for someone else.
Right.
And saying, I want to invest in them intentionally so that their life is impacted not just by my life, but my faith in Christ does come through. And usually even those who aren't Christians maybe will come back one day and say, I know what Coach talked about when I sat in his office that day, and he gave me a Bible. I didn't think about it at the time, or I just thought, oh, brother, here's another Christian trying to promote something. But, I've heard tons of stories, and I have a friend from China who got a Bible and didn't look at it, and a year later, when he was on the edge of suicide, pulled it out.
Yep.
And now he's a pastor, in China. It's just like incredible stuff like that. So you see the fruit of your investment because you intentionally invest and influence.
Well, I tell you a true story on that. And when I went to my father's funeral, the night before, they had everybody come by in visitation, and the first person to show up at his visitation was a former player of his, and he was a former player that my dad had kicked off the team in college.
Wow!
And he was the first one there, and I looked at him and I said his name, and he came up with tears rolling down his eyes, hugged me, crying, and he goes, "You know something, Mike?" He said, "I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for your dad."
Wow.
He said he loved me and he cared for me more than any man ever had in my life, and he cared more about me than I could just carry a football.
Wow.
And what he did by kicking me off the team, because he worked with me all the time and I wouldn't do it, I was a knucklehead, and then he helped me get a scholarship to another school, and now I've been married, my 2 kids are doing well, I'm a registered nurse and I'm doing great. My life's on the right track, and I just wanted to come tell you that.
Wow.
And tell you how much your dad meant to me.
That's awesome.
So exactly what you said right there. Even a guy that he had to kick off the team that he still loved and cared while he was doing it, and then helped him through other things as he went through life, he would call Dad, to me is a great example of Christ.
Yeah.
Because he disciplines us sometimes, but
Sure
he's still
he does.
holding us, and he still loves us, and he still cares for us because we've hurt him.
Yeah.
And he's helping us get through. And I think that was, so when I when I cut out all the other stuff, because, you got to win, you got to do this, you have all these different things, and you hear all these people talking. If you can cut out all the noise, which we should, and listen to the one voice that matters, then we can affect people for eternity more than just a win and a loss.
That's exactly right.
Now, I still want to win games. I still want to do all that, and it hurts when I lose because you invest, and it feels great when you win. But in reality, that fades fast.
Yeah.
But the other doesn't.
That's right.
It lasts for eternity.
That's good. And like you mentioned, the example that your dad has been of being a person that influences, and like you yourself, and you spoke to it earlier, that how your actions will add to, representing who God is. And how you said it's not just sharing the gospel with them, but when that time comes and this, Holy Spirit opens that door, that you do it. But I fully believe that your life amplifies the gospel or it doesn't. And I know that's a strong statement to say. It's like, well, it's the work of the Holy Spirit moving, but we can fully say that if you live like a hellion, you know what I mean, and you represent this God, since you're an ambassador for him, it sure does take away from the gospel, because you're not living it in the manner of it. So it's awesome to see how you spoke to that, because that's what I was just processing while you were speaking. And
it is definitely something that you have to work at every day.
Sure.
You can't say, well, I'm just going to go live right. You have to dive into his word. You have to take time in prayer. You have to surround your people with the right people. Because there's times I look back and my actions, they wouldn't have said how I reacted to something. Usually it's how I react to something.
That's good.
They would go, whoa, wait a minute. That's not how a Christian reacts. Well, you're right. I'm not perfect. But at the same time, I need to make sure I don't do that often. Then they go, well, his faith isn't really real. And I'm pretty sure there's some situations out there that people say, well, I saw that. Mike's just a hypocrite on how he acted on something. And I think that I ask for forgiveness. I work through it. I move on. And hopefully they see that we aren't robots, that we really are real people, and that we're struggling through different things too.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, anybody that has ever been on I-240 or 40 with me when I'm driving, I mean, I keep thinking one day I'm just going to, try to run my pastor off the road or something. Somebody from church member, a little old lady, and she goes, yeah, I thought you were a minister or a Christian. And I'm like, yeah, I am, but I'm still competitive when it comes to driving. I really am. So
that's right. I'm a minister, meaning I can forgive myself quicker when I cuss at everybody out on the interstate.
Well, and that's the thing, is one of those things where God continues to come back and go, Jeff, is that really where I'm represented best in the way that you just acted? And of course my wife and my kids will say, Jeff, would you stop doing that too? But we need accountability, we need sharpening in our lives, even if we are influencing other people. And I think that's important, because a lot of times the thing that stops a lot of young adults from trying to influence or trying to disciple other people is that they don't feel adequate because they mess up.
Well, I agree with you, and I think it's also on the flip side. I think a lot of people don't want to become a Christian because they don't feel adequate to be a Christian.
Yeah.
Well, none of us are adequate.
None of us are, yeah.
And none of us are adequate when we are a Christian. None of us are adequate. There was one person that was, in Jesus Christ, and he's going to change us and grow us. And we won't be fully fulfilled until we're in heaven sitting at his feet.
Yeah.
And fully in his realm of his spirit.
Yeah.
Then we'll be truly as he sees us. And I think that's what's so amazing is once we come to know Christ, he sees us as perfect.
Yeah.
We're not, but he sees us as perfect, and he knows because he sees who we're going to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true if we realize that and have a vision on that. And we're not going to always live up to what we're supposed to. We can't beat ourselves up. Yeah. Now, does that mean we keep doing? No, you work on changing through him. But it's a daily basis.
Sure.
Right. It's hard. I mean, your faith isn't something you put in cruise control and you just like, but the far right of that too, it's, well, you're not just striving to be perfect. It's like you're striving to be like Jesus, and it just so happens that he is perfect.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's, resting in him and his peace and his mercy and his grace, but like you said, still being disciplined to come to him, because every day you got to get up and do something.
Right.
So you might as well go and try to be like him, even though you're going to fall short. Run back to his arms and say, hey, I messed up again.
Exactly.
And it's because you always will. And so, but it's good to know that he's faithful, and he'll continue to grow you and or what's the word? I mean, the work that he started in you.
Completed. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, think about we have in common, and we mentioned him earlier before the podcast. Sing Oldham, Dr. Oldham.
Yeah. Dr. Oldham is awesome.
He used to be at First Baptist Martin, and he used to say something to me when I was on staff there. He said, what discipleship and influence is you learn a little, and then you teach a little. Then you learn a little more, and then you teach a little more. Always learning, always teaching.
Right.
And that's what this is that as we walk with Christ, and you mentioned this, is that we want to be like Christ. As we're with him, then we're going to share him with other people as we go.
Right. That's awesome. And especially like everything you said, I'm sitting here soaking it up, you know what I mean? Because you are talking about things that I cannot relate to, like having kids and like being married and what, how you have to, you learn you're selfish. And I'm like, oh, I thought I was.
You have spiritual children. Sorry, that was not social distancing.
Easy, Jeff. But I have influence, I guess, too, even when I don't think I do.
Exactly. And that's what's important for young adults to realize is that they have responsibility for people who are their spiritual children.
And somebody said in my family group the other day that even when it feels like people are not watching you, they usually are, even though you're not in this leadership position or whatever. Because, I mean, that's what young adults and people my age or even younger probably associate that with, or even adults now that, okay, well, the real leaders are the coaches, the pastors, the teachers, and I'm just here doing my thing. Well, it's like, no, somebody's always watching. You're not, you don't have to have a bunch of followers on social media or whatever to be this influencer.
Yeah.
Because every day you live, everywhere you go, and you claim this title of Christ, people look at you like, well, he just claims to be perfect.
Right.
But it's like, no, I'm not, and this is what I have to run to.
Right.
And so it's good. But to wrap up here, Coach, do you have like a life verse that you have, or a verse of Scripture that's on your mind?
I do. Matthew 22:37 through 39. They were asking Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? What's the greatest thing you can do? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. And then the second part, I get that, and I try to do that. The second part is probably the hardest for me. And then love your neighbor as yourself. I don't always do that. And I think that the more, what he was saying was, the more you go closer to him, then the more you will do the second.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a verse that I try to live by on a daily basis. And I have to do the first part before I'll be able to do the second part. I can't just go say I'm going to love people more if I don't love him and get his through my spirit, then I know how to love people because I'll look at them differently. I'll care for them differently.
Yeah.
I won't look at it because a lot of times people love people or care about people because of what they can do for them.
Okay, yeah.
And I want to be the exact opposite if I can, and I'm not always. But how do I love them no matter what I get in return? And I think that's a hard thing to do in our world, so to speak, at times. Or realize, why are people trying to be friends with you?
Right.
So you want to be able to love them. And you only can do that through getting to know Christ better and better.
That's true. Because a lot of times I think, too, as Christians, we'll tell ourselves, I want to go love somebody, but are my motives here truly pure? I can put the label of love, but if I'm just here to shake hands and smile, I'm about just like a politician, you know what I mean, that doesn't care, or just somebody that's trying to get what they want from a relationship. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, you have anything else?
I was just going to ask, okay, we're talking to young adults primarily, college students and others. If you had just one thing that you could say to any young adult that's facing life choices, I know this is a broad question, but is there a piece of advice that you would say, hey, here's what, if maybe you've got a student that's graduating and heading off, what are you going to tell them?
Well, the first thing I'll tell them is graduating from college, and they're not going to like to hear this, but I believe after doing this all these years with college students, with my own kids, is probably the hardest year of your life is the day after you graduate. Because you're concerned about the future. You're going out there and for the first time in your life, you really don't have, well, I got to go to class, I've got this direction, I've got this. Now you're probably moving to a new area, you're going to a new job, you don't have a nucleus of friends right there all the time, okay? You can't sleep in and go to class at 10 o'clock. You got to get up and go to work. You got to do different things. It's a really tough time. And I think at the same time, you're also still trying to find your way. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by find your way, you're trying to find out truly where God wants you to go. And I think even non-Christians, if they are searching, and God is going to place them in a place where they can be fruitful, where they can be passionate about what they do. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I would say is do what you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. Don't just do a job. And that's hard to do when you get out.
Right.
Now, sometimes you might take a job and you're doing it and you think and then all of a sudden, I'm not passionate about it. It's not that you have to work every day. You just don't have, and then somehow, some way, he directs you another path. Because I didn't go into coaching right out. I was a graduate from Georgia Tech with a business management degree. I went as a logistics manager for a condiment plant in Nashville, and I could start on the ground floor, and I was going to get stocks, and I was going to do all that, and I did that for a year, and it was okay. And then I got a phone call out of the blue to go be a graduate assistant and start coaching, and I did that. I think there's also a time to understand you're still growing and seeing where you want to go, and I think that everything doesn't have to be just cut and laid out. And I think that's a hard growing time. So just trust him and go.
That's good. Good word.
For sure. And I'll add to that, I was looking at a verse this morning, Matthew 6:33, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all else will be added to you.
Right.
If you just trust him where you need to go, he'll take care of your needs. So
exactly.
That's awesome to hear. Well, Coach, thank you so much for joining us. Jeff, do you have anything else?
Man, this is good stuff. Thank you, Coach.
A lot of good stuff. I've been writing plenty of notes over here that I'm going to have to go and document later. But like I said, thank you so much for joining us, Coach. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Long Run Podcast. You can find more episodes at thelongrunpodcast.org, and you can also type in on Spotify or Apple iTunes Podcasts to find more episodes. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next week.